You're about to listen to a podcast full of wonder, excitement, and discovery. It's time for an adventure through Odyssey. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Adventures Through Odyssey podcast, Odyssey Revisited. I'm Will here with John. We're tackling our first post-summer episodes, and we kick that off with Back to School. Leslie seems to have trouble with the truth. Over-exaggeration seems to be her middle name. Interesting summary.
I feel like Odyssey very early, like we're like, kids should not exaggerate.
I would agree with that.
Because I feel like we're not that far into our episode recap, going through them all. We have this one. We have the Lost episode.
Yeah.
But they ended up remaking with the whole cowboy.
Yeah, that's coming up in a minute, actually.
And then they have the Tangled Web.
Yes.
And it's just a little bit like, okay, I think we get the idea.
I would agree. I guess I'm trying to figure out why this and the next episode are sequels to each other, but we'll get to that. Otherwise, because I remember having this episode on tape, because like our Christian bookstore would bundle Odyssey episodes by a theme, and I think this was like school-based episodes or something.
Yeah.
So, I do remember this one vividly. It took me a few listens to get that she was exaggerating the stories.
I know, I do think for a kid, you're kind of like, what? Like, is this what school's like?
Well, also, because, like, at the end when her mom's being...
Kid.
Yeah. But, like, at the end when her mom's being nice, that threw me a bit. Like, wait, what just happened?
Yeah. I think sometimes, of course, when you're an adult, you're like, oh, this is clear what's going on. But I do think sometimes, especially earlier in Odyssey, you're like, wait, is this real? Or, like, what's going on? Like, if you're young enough and you're just like, I don't understand this.
Right.
I remember, this is a later one, but I also remember as a child, like, the first couple times I heard that fish episode.
Oh, yeah.
Where it's, like, the fish's perspective of it all.
Yeah, that was a take on Sunset Boulevard, a movie kids definitely know of.
Right, it's such a weird pull. I was like, I don't know what's going on here.
Absolutely. And maybe we can talk about these two episodes in tandem then. It sure seems like it to me. Leslie still hasn't learned her lesson and continues to tell stories. However, this time one of her stories may actually be true.
This does feel like a very interesting decision. I don't know if they wrote a new episode and then they're like, we gotta and they were talking about like, oh, we could redo some of these Harley episodes.
That's possible.
Like, we just wrote an episode about someone who exaggerates. We can have her show up in both.
Actually, it was a Family Portraits episode.
Okay, Family Portraits episode, but you get what I mean.
Yes, no, I agree. I mean, not that Odyssey episodes can't have sequels to each other. I do find it weird that we have this first episode. This almost plays as a part 2, showing that she wasn't exaggerating. But Back to School gets an album release, and this is in the Lost episodes.
Yeah, it's a little fishy.
Right. So, and again, they don't need to do this. I would love if in the Lost episodes they had put a little explanation as to why each episode was in there.
I agree. I think that would have been interesting. I think the problem is a lot would be like, well, this was part of a thing called Family Portraits.
And that's fine. Like, this episode probably was just, it never made it into an album because they just never did it.
Look, I feel like the Lost Episodes album is really like 3 or 4 episodes, maybe like 5 that are really considered lost. Like, they're like, we chose not to air this for specific reasons, like Pamela Has a Problem.
Agreed.
But like, I feel like a lot of them, it's like, well, we could just put the Family Portraits episodes in there that we didn't release as bonus features on other albums.
Exactly.
That's what it feels like.
I would agree. Again, not a big deal. Just notice that. I'm just double checking my notes.
I mean, I think these are good episodes. I think they're interesting. I think I think the first one is the exaggeration is interesting, but I think a little kid could be confused by that. I think the second episode, I think there's issues with it. I do think the remade version is better because it's a little right. I think it works a little better. Just I think the acting's a little better in it. I think I like it's like a cowboy that comes, not like a saloon woman.
Yes. I also like, again, we've got Lucy in this episode sort of starting to solidify major reoccurring characters.
Yeah. And so I think it's an improvement from the original. I do think it's just weird that it's like, this is like very similar to the same plot with the added caveat. There's also the thing where it's like, well, maybe sometimes you need to believe people.
Yeah, it kind of, don't know why. Other than maybe they felt like the first episode wasn't good enough.
I know, this had been like in this one and even like a few episodes later. It's just the fact that it's like back to back. Maybe they thought like, oh, we can do a 2-parter, and then they're like, these are kind of tangentially related parts.
Yes. All right.
Or maybe they're like, they did a sequel and they were kind of skittish on doing sequels, so they're like, it should be the immediate next episode, so someone listening from last week will hear it.
I would agree with that. I mean, and we'll talk about this if we ever get to guest star on this podcast we're talking with. Odyssey was kind of, I think for a lot of people, their first childhood introduction to serialized storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of things modern shows are doing, like carrying over characters, learning lessons, arcs, a lot of that is from Odyssey not directly from Odyssey, but Odyssey was doing that back in the 80s.
Yeah.
All right, now an episode I do think was truly lost. What are we going to do about Halloween? A Halloween party at Wit's End strives to teach children of Odyssey to celebrate saints and not demons on October 31st.
So, maybe this is just me. I feel like, I think in terms of a show, like a thing that's just supposed to tell the history of Halloween, like for kids, it's like, okay, this does a pretty good job. It fulfills that purpose. I also think Odyssey is smart in the sense where it's like, well, instead of just like saying we're not going to do anything, let's do our own thing so the kids can still have fun.
Yes, and I also liked at the beginning when Wit said, I can't tell your parents what to do. Their decision is their decision. At that point, it almost sounded like he was going to be in support of trick-or-treating.
Yeah.
Which was interesting.
It is, I will say it is interesting. And I actually wonder if part of the reason this episode was lost was because the end, they kind of be like, these people who can't have anything on Halloween, like, it's whatever.
I was about to say that it kind of makes it sound like this dude comes into the church judging people who want to do Halloween, then they judge him for throwing things against Wit's Bible party, which I don't want to stereotype people who listen to Adventures in Odyssey. I have to imagine a lot of Adventures in Odyssey parents would have also disagreed about the Bible party just on principle of it's still glorifying Halloween to an extent. And I understand that. It was also pulled from rotation after 6 years as a cassette you could give out to trick-or-treaters.
Mm-hmm. So, it's a little... I've always thought it's weird, though, because, so one thing is, Halloween kind of started as a separate thing, and then it kind of got roped in, like the festivities got roped in. But it's like no more of a pagan, non-Christian holiday than like Christmas or Easter is, in terms of like, it started off as like something completely different and weird, and then it turned into like a religious holiday. And it's just weird to me that now, Halloween's the one that's moved furthest, I suppose, because like people don't really celebrate All Saints Day that much.
Well, right, and I'm actually sure a lot of people who celebrated Halloween would celebrate All Saints Day, so in a weird way, it's gone backwards a little bit.
Right, yeah. It's kind of like, I don't know, it seems weird to me that Halloween is such a sticking point. Like, if someone's like, we don't celebrate Christmas because technically Christ wasn't born on that day and it was just based off like this pagan like holiday that we like incorporate, like the church incorporated in, where we're going to change this pagan holiday into a religious holiday to celebrate the birth of Christ. I kind of feel like if someone's like, I don't celebrate Christmas, I don't celebrate Halloween, that's fine. Like, it's like, okay, that's fine. You're kind of just against like this incorporation of pagan holidays.
Or you're a Jehovah's Witness.
Wow. But I think I wonder if that's why they took it off, because you have people complaining. It's like, but Christmas, like, you're complaining about this, but like Christmas is also this. It's like, do something about Christmas, or it's like, are you mocking us for like not celebrating Halloween? And some people being like, Halloween is like just a fun holiday. We're not taking it as this demon thing.
Right. Well, yes, I think probably the most vocal were the people complaining who were the dad who didn't show up to the party because he still thought it was glorifying Halloween. They're like, now my kids are mad because your episode painted me as being in the wrong, which is a little weird. But yes, I think this is a good episode. I do think it plays like something you'd play either in the car or at your actual church's Bible character dress-up party to explain what's going on.
Yeah. And I do think a lot of churches have done like trunk or treats or like, you know, Halloween like events kind of in place of some of it.
Right. I mean, like, I'll tell you, we do this event at our church every Halloween, but we never use the word Halloween, so...
Yeah. And I don't think that's bad. I mean, I think the bigger issues with Halloween now are like, how safe is it? Like, I mean, you have to be with your kids nowadays.
That is true. And they were talking about razor blades in this episode, which was always overblown by the media. And, you know...
Yeah.
Halloween has got a little weirder since this episode aired, so...
It's true. I mean, Halloween is like a weird holiday, but I do feel like to a large extent, if you're trick-or-treating in a neighborhood, it's probably not that weird.
I would agree. I was getting like, you know, that grown-up Halloween song from The Simpsons.
Yeah. I think like there's a lot of adults that have gone on to Halloween, and it like that part of it's more weird. But I think kids, unless you take them, are not necessarily going to get exposed to that.
True. But anyway, we're not judging anyone's Halloween decisions on this podcast.
No, I think it's fine. I'm always curious about what's the if you're gonna get upset at Halloween, what's the difference between Halloween and Christmas? And I mean, I guess like now Christmas is still thought of as the birth of Christ, whereas Halloween's not thought about that at all.
That is true.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay. So interesting episode to uncover from the vault. It was also available for free for years on a CD from Focus on the Family, which is kind of funny. Anyway, The Shepard and the Giant. Connie experiences the story of the Shepard and the Giant using the environment enhancer, a new creation by Wit.
Good episode. You know, I mean, it's like David and Goliath.
Yes.
It's clearly like they keep brainstorming like alternatives, like, and they're not quite at the imagination station yet.
I would agree. I also think it's kind of meta that Connie's basically listening to a radio drama.
It is. But it is, I've liked this episode. I think it's good. I always forget it isn't the imagination station.
That is true.
Because it's so immersive. It's as close as you could get. Especially because it's like an audio thing.
Absolutely.
I mean, Connie must just have really good visualization in her head.
I was about to say, like, again, it's one of those, what exactly is this thing?
But it's good, but it's like, you can see they're taking these episodes, like, how can we have the kids immersed in history or immersed in Bible stories? And this is probably, like, the best they've done so far, but it's not quite at what the imagination station will be.
Yes, I also think this might be the first episode of where the kids go back in time where a character references, I haven't seen you in weeks. Just nothing that important, just a fun side note.
It is fun.
And I would also say this is kind of part of what I would like to call the jump-starting Connie's conversion, because from here it's just a snowball.
Yeah, it's true.
So, alrighty, a single vote. Connie learns from Wit how every vote matters.
So, definitely, like... Man, well, here's the funny thing. Aren't most of these stories fake?
So the story about Texas is true. The other two are either completely made up or based on other events.
Yeah, so it's like, it's a great idea for an episode, I think, when you get down to it. I mean, it's interesting in terms of like definitely like kind of like Odyssey's like still like very like pro-America, but like not like explicitly taking like a political stance on things. But it's like the founding, people would argue the founding father stuff nowadays, but like the founding fathers are great, and it's like the Declaration of Independence, and it's like voting is so good, and it's like tied in with our Christian ethic. You know, I don't think that's necessarily bad, but it's like it's not really what they're doing now.
Yes, I would agree. I mean, this episode also aired right before the 2 days before the 1988 presidential election, so I'm just glad it wasn't before the 2000 presidential election, or this episode would have a very interesting connotation.
I agree with that. Who was running in 1988? It was H.W. Buck and Dukakis.
Yes.
I do think it's interesting because Connie makes the decent point where it's like, but that Texas guy was a senator. And it's like, yes, it is true. That guy had a lot more power than the normal person. And so it's a little deflating that they act like these other two stories are true when they're really not quite true.
Exactly. And maybe if like the school election had been won by one vote or something.
Yeah, I think that would have been a better wraparound to that kind of stuff. I also like, you know, as someone who has done, you know, political science in college and done stuff like law and is in law school, it is more complex than this. And I don't think they would do this episode today because I think there's so much controversy around voting, especially when it's like, I mean, just stuff with the popular vote, stuff with like the Electoral College. I mean, stuff with like just the whole election, like the supposed election scandal and like all this different stuff. I just feel like it's like voting in something Odyssey would be like, let's not touch upon this right now.
I would kind of concur. And they already had to release a statement that Witt didn't vote for Trump. So.
Did they?
Yes. I remember this was like because it was mentioned on Phil Vischer's podcast. So that's when you know it's big news. So.
That's funny.
Yes. But anyway, yeah, fine episode. It says here the message is government and civic duty, but I don't think the episode ends saying go vote.
Yeah, it does. Remember, he goes up there, the kid goes up there and is like inspired. And it's like, you may think that like one vote, it doesn't mean anything. And he gives that for his speech and basically just shares the exact same story Witt told him.
Well, right. Also, I think it's weird for a kid show to end saying kids go vote.
It is true. I mean, I do think more people should go and vote, to be honest. But the whole voting as a civic duty thing, I think, was much bigger in the past.
I would concur.
I think more Americans should go and vote, and there's a lot of things implicated in that. But it is funny for a children's show, I guess. But it's like you have to tell them when they're young, but at the same time, it's a lot of confusing things. I guess this episode's disappointing when I found out that like, oh, the two ones where it was just a normal person didn't necessarily happen.
Right. Alrighty. Last episode for this episode, Heroes. Jimmy Barkley looks up to Lightning Livingston, the star basketball player. When Lightning is accused of using drugs, Jimmy stands up for him, but doesn't know what the truth is. So, I like the structure of this episode in that it's after the drug scandal, Lightning moves to Odyssey, and then they find out not. Jimmy finds this out on TV, and Whit pulls some strings in Hollywood to get Lightning to come to Whit's end and explain everything to him.
Yeah. I mean, I'm assuming when they say drugs, they mean steroids.
I would assume so. I'm seeing if this is based off anything, and it does not seem to be.
I mean, I actually think it's a pretty, like, impressive episode back then. I mean, you're kind of deconstructing some of the celebrity thing, but you're also, like, showing that they're people.
Yes.
Also, like, I'm curious about the anti-drug thing. Like, maybe they mention it other ways, but it's like I would hope it was steroids.
I would
that
assume
works a little better, but I wonder if they did general just drugs.
Well, it was
to, like,
war
have
on
it
drugs
be more
time.
Right, I was gonna say it's war on drugs time, and I wonder if they are like, oh, this is more applicable, even though it's like an athlete getting kicked out in the 80s. It's like it's probably steroid use, I would think.
I would assume it was steroids, but I think drugs was just every kid knows what drugs are.
That's the thing.
So, I think it's a fine episode. I like the message, especially for so early on in Odyssey's run, to talk about these imperfect people in the Bible.
Yeah. No, I think that's like a great message that I think often gets overlooked. I think even like I wish current day Odyssey, I wish more like the message I love, because I do think there's this thought that like, oh, you know, we forget that these people were imperfect and like to glance over it. I wish, and this isn't the episode's fault, this is my own personal wish for Christian stuff. I wish there'd be a focus on like the fact that like, right, these people were flawed, but at the same time, like they had to suffer the consequences of their flaws.
Yes.
I've heard, so like some people forget that like, you know, God uses flawed people, but I've also heard some people argue that like, well, this person's flawed, but, you know, God can still use them. It's like, well, sure, but also like Samson like lost his strength, was like taken prisoner and ended up dying and, you know, figuring himself out. David's son died. Like, you know, like there were consequences to their sinful actions.
I would agree with that.
But that's not on this episode. I don't think this episode needs to go into that part of it, but
right.
You know.
And this, the only thing, and this is more, again, like you said, a media thing in general. The episode where the celebrity comes to town, and I know it's an in-universe celebrity, and seems to become pretty good friends with one of the main characters. And it's just always hanging there. I know he briefly comes back when they get robbed at Christmas time, but
I feel like, though, when he's if he's like an athlete working with kids,
yes,
it's like, okay, it's a kid that meets him while like helping with that kind of stuff. It's like, okay, I can buy that at least.
I guess you're right. It was just an
buy
interesting thing. 'Cause
a little more than Chad Pearson.
Fair. Very fair. What was I going to say about that? Just because Jimmy's been in some hard straits before, and you think his friend Lightning would come to his aid.
It would be funny. I mean, what a callback that would be if they brought back Lightning Livingston. Like, Lightning Livingston was at that camp with Marvin.
Well, he was
like,
mentioned in the Holy Hoopster episode.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. It is a little, it's like this weird, because I guess he never mentioned he moved, so.
Yeah.
But
they suddenly in a club episode bring him in as like the coach of the basketball team.
But anyway, sorry everyone, small technical issue, but yeah, this is another solid episode. I just always like to talk about, this is one of those weird in-continuity things where, and I also get it, him sharing his real name with Jimmy might be something he does with all the kids he coaches, but
yeah.
Anyway, so we'll see you next time for our next 6 episodes, and it's a lot of heavy ones, so I'd get some Xanax or something. Drugs!
I get a nice cup of tea, some nice, like a stuffed animal, like some milk and cookies, like, do not take Xanax.
Unless your doctor prescribed it.
Well, sure, but not specifically for this episode.
I know, I just want to make sure no one doesn't take their medicine because John said that.
I highly doubt it.
Okay, we'll see you next time.